Many of us have owned a houseplant at some point in our lives. Perhaps one was gifted to you, or maybe you just thought a bin of greenery would look nice in your home. Whatever the reason, it's likely that plant ended up dead in a trash bin not too long afterwards. This is the life cycle for most houseplants. On the surface, houseplants may seem like a small positive way to contribute to the environment. However, there are huge environmental costs within the plant industry. First, I'd like to talk about how and why the plant industry has boomed over recent years. Next, I'd like to discuss how the plant industry has had a negative impact on the environment. Finally, I'd like to talk about ways we can implement greener practices within the plant industry, both at the production and consumer level. The interest in houseplants has been on an upward trend for some time. According to CNN's article, How Green is Your Pinterest Perfect Plant Collection? In the US alone, there are 2,300 indoor plant growers, and sales were worth more than $691 million in 2019. The COVID-19 pandemic only intensified the desire to bring the outside in as the whole world sheltered in place. And this was also exacerbated by social media. According to Vox's article, Are Your Houseplants Actually Good for the Planet? 71% of North American greenhouses indicated a rise in plant sales in 2020. 18 to 34-year-olds have been the dominant source of sales in recent years, and is unlikely to see wavering among this demographic anytime soon. But sadly, as demand increases, so does the amount of waste that the plant industry creates. Industrial greenhouses have strict automated systems to ensure that they yield the most amount of viable plants possible. They use large acres of land, millions of gallons of water, and have precise heat and lighting conditions that are utilized every day to cultivate enough plants to meet consumer demands. But excessive water use puts further strain on already drought-prone areas. And according to CNN's article, nitrates from fertilizers have contaminated Chesapeake Bay as well as California's drinking water system. Nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas, is also released from these fertilizers, and it warms the atmosphere 300 times more than carbon dioxide. Additionally, the popularity of peat moss and potting mix has contributed to a depletion of peatlands worldwide due to their extremely slow growth rate. Even with the industry's efforts to minimize loss, Business Insider's YouTube video, Why We Kill So Many Plants But Spend Billions on Them Anyway, notes that nearly half of all plants will die at some point along the supply chain, and only 3 out of 10 of houseplants will survive for a significant amount of time in a customer's home. With such a high turnover rate, it is imperative that we implement greener practices within the plant industry. But how? At the industrial level, a few green practices that could be implemented are recycling water, introducing predatory pests to get rid of mites instead of harmful pesticides, using coconut coir for potting mix, which is a sustainable alternative to peat moss, and using biodegradable pots to plant seedlings. At consumer level, it is important to be more mindful of your own plant miles. That is the metric system used to describe how far a plant must travel to reach its point of sale, according to Vox's article. Try to buy locally instead of from a big box department store or online. Set up plant swaps with your neighbors and propagate from your existing collection instead of buying new. Attempt to revive your dying plants instead of throwing them out, or rehome them to a friend with a much more experienced green thumb. And if all else fails, compost your dead plants instead of tossing them in the trash. To summarize, the houseplant industry boomed into 2020 due to the pandemic and has not wavered in popularity since. However, the growing demand for houseplants has negatively impacted the environment and atmosphere through overwatering, toxic runoff from fertilizers, overharvesting of peat moss, and overuse of single-use plastics. The industrial growing industry can take steps to minimize their environmental impact by implementing a variety of greener practices. And customers can also contribute by buying locally and finding more sustainable ways to grow their plant collection. I hope this information has been insightful for you. The next time you decide to buy a plant, what steps will you take to minimize your environmental impact?